Hello and welcome to another audio analysis. In today's video we're taking a look at the track Age of Consent by the English post-punk and new wave band New Order. This was the opening track on their 1983 album Poet Corruption and lies one of my favourites from that decade and one of just many that the band did produce across their career, across the 80s, 90s, even still until modern day, producing some fantastic music that just remains constantly timeless. Even songs such as Blue Monday, which was actually kind of part of this album but not featured on the vinyl release when it was initially released in 83 before being re-released in 88, still remains one of the most iconic tracks of the actual 80s, of that dance era almost that we did have rising throughout the decade, and also still to this day with various remixes and just still being featured in many club scenes, being remixed in 1,000,001 different ways. The band's influence certainly is still felt very much to this day. The number of acts, even just throughout the 80s all the way through to modern times, that will often cite them as an influence, and I certainly feel like they will be a band that will be remembered for many years to come, initially forming from the remnants of Joy Division, another iconic act of the late 70s, and really just powering forward, remaining very popular, and even kind of the splintered style that they have got now with Peter Hook and The Light, and really the band breaking into different pieces. Each of the bands still carries some strong weight as to their production, into their musical style as well, even still to this modern day. So did this track consent to success or simply not meet the requirements? Let's take a look at exactly how it sounds. So one thing I love that the New Order did pretty much throughout most of their music in the 80s, they just always had these really strong, energetic intros with really strong guitars, really pacey drums as well, despite occasionally dipping into some slower tones. Many of their tracks were just naturally known for these very long, slow builds that made it work. They had so many interesting 12-inch remixes that weren't overly repetitive. Don't get me wrong, Blue Monday, the 12-minute version of that did get a bit endless, but certainly for some of these tracks that were kind of 8-9 minutes long at times, and you look at Thieves Like Us and some of the others, they were really able to make it really work and really not make it bland and boring. They had this interesting style that many bands couldn't emulate in really drawing out these longer tracks but making them still just really interesting. And for this track as well, I love how it opens up the line, "Won't you please let me go?" This idea of relationships, this idea of age of consent really coming in, the idea of young lovers and things like that. These words lie inside, "They hurt me so." The idea of being trapped in a relationship that you want to get out of. The words are in, the kind of breakup words are effectively there, but they can't escape, and it's hurting to stay in this relationship. This idea of "won't you please let me go?" Won't you be the one to really break things off and so we can go our separate ways?
I'm not the kind that likes to tell you just what I want to. I'm not the kind that needs to tell you just what you want me to. I saw you this morning and thought that you might like to know. I received your message in full a few days ago. I understood every word that it said, and now that I've actually heard it, you're going to regret.
And I love for this verse how we get this idea, "I saw you this morning, I thought you might like to know." It's just this idea that kind of messages took a bit longer to really convey. You didn't have just Snapchat and Facebook and all these things where you could just simply message back and forth. Relationships were much more built on communication, really having either that verbal or that written communication between the two. "I received your message in full a few days ago. I understand every word that it said, and now that I've actually heard it." So it's kind of taking this time to actually digest the message that has been pulled across from this other person in the relationship. And you're going from that point of really wanting to break things off to this point of regret. You're going to regret kind of breaking things off or really kind of bringing things to an end. So it's really interesting how it touches almost like a story. You can see the development as the track does progress.
And I'm not the kind that likes to tell you just what you want me to. You're not the kind that needs to tell me about the birds and the bees.
this is what I mean about some of the instrumental breaks. They're constantly swapping layers in and out, and that was what really made the band able to really plush out these longer tracks. It's not a track that gets boring. You can just really sit, sway along, tap along to it, and that pace really helps to do that as well. It really gives it this good drive in the actual track itself, really just kind of pushes that idea forward. And certainly with some of the things in the chorus, I love how it changes each single time. And we're opening with the one, I'm not the kind that likes to tell you just what I want to do. You often say this in relationships, like how often do you tell your partner where should we go to eat, and they kind of just say wherever, they don't really mind. This idea of communication really being brought through again. I'm not the kind that likes to tell you just what I want to do. This idea of kind of having this kind of one-sided almost communication. I'm not the kind that needs to tell you just what you want me to. This idea of kind of just being quite open and very honest with each other, not just kind of saying what you're not truly feeling. So you can really see these mixed messages that are coming across. Then in the chorus we do see the switch up. You're not the kind that needs to tell me about the birds and the bees. So this could be referencing to the idea of maybe pregnancy and things like that, telling somebody over the phone or certainly by a message. The idea of birds and bees, the idea of kind of sex coming in, and that kind of, again, that age of consent, that young relationship really being brought in by the actual lyrics as well. So it's really interesting how they switch up the chorus to kind of show this development as the track does progress. So one thing I want to touch on from the actual bridge is the line, crucial point, one day becomes a crime, because this is where the song kind of splits off. Although it's looking at relationships and the idea of the idea of the age of consent, it does actually tie in with the Sexual Offences Act of 1967, which did represent a partial decriminalisation of male homosexuality. It kind of became less of a what was considered a crime before that, and the age of consent became 21 for male partners to kind of go at it effectively in the privacy of their own home. This would later be changed down to 16 in the 90s. Obviously with this song being written in 83 or 82, 83, the kind of focus was on that idea. So really see this ambiguity coming across. Although it can tie to the idea of heterosexual relationships, it can also be touching on the idea of homosexual relationships as well. The idea of kind of being in secrecy, the idea of won't you please let me go, these kind of feelings of it being almost criminal to be with a male partner, and that comes through the idea of this kind of breakup. I'm not the kind who likes to tell you just what you want me to. So you're kind of hiding in fear almost, and it's something that we've seen kind of develop as years have gone. The idea of kind of more and more people coming out, being quite open as the kind of laws have kind of eased and been much less sort of criminalizing of kind of homosexuality. So you can really see how that can come across in this track as well. It really has that dual purpose, that dual meaning that makes it applicable to lots of different people. yes, it's just one of those songs, no matter how many times I hear it, I can just never get sick of it. The beautiful production, the drums are actually kind of quite inspired by an original recording of Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division, and they kind of use that to influence in towards this track, and it was something that they really drew inspiration from with a lot of their music going forward. But I just love how it's got this really upbeat styling to it with the synths and things like that really coming in, the really twangy guitars were played at pace as well, despite the fact that this track is certainly about the idea of losing a loved one, this idea of breakups and relationships coming to an end. So it's got this really interesting kind of juxtaposition between the actual musical styling and the actual lyrics themselves. But I like how it's got that ambiguity as well in the actual track, the ability to kind of look at just relationships in many different forms and really tie in some ideas through some very clever lyrics. The idea of the birds and the bees, the crucial point, one day becomes a crime, and really just mixing in these very subtle lyrics that have quite a lot of meaning. And it's again just one of the iconic tracks they did release across the course of the decade, certainly Blue Monday being one of the most iconic, and even some of the tracks they did release in the 90s. World in Motion for football, that was their only ever UK #1, and for good reason, with obviously the popularity of football around that time. And this song was certainly very strong, but never had the same impact in the charts as many of their other tracks, but still just one of the great songs from what is a very iconic album, even still to this day. So that'll be everything for today's video. But if you are hearing this track for the first time, then feel free to let me know your thoughts. Just one of the many great tracks from the 80s, and certainly one that showed an incredible standard in its production and its actual stylings as well. But I would love to know your personal thoughts regarding the track. Also, if you'd like to see more content like this, then please do feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in the next audio analysis.